All right, good afternoon, Trade Pros. This is Mark from Trade Pro Academy checking in here on today's lovely date, Wednesday, May the 22nd. Welcome to another edition here of our Futures Afternoon Update. Today, we're going to get started quickly by taking a quick look at some of the drivers that came out through this morning's session, as well as what we've got planned on the docket for the remainder of today's session. And then we're going to take a quick look at some of the key levels here in the market where we could look to potentially get positioned, and we'll go from there. So first things first, let's take a quick peek at some of the drivers that came in during the U.S. session. We had Georgie cover some of the overnight drivers, mainly had to do with regards to, China-U.S. trade war. A couple of squawks came out with regards to that, as far as China ready to retaliate to the U.S. tariffs. Trump administration also said to be considering placing Hikvision to the blacklist along with 4 other companies. And Chinese ambassador also to U.S., whose name is Tian Kai. Is it Tian Kai? Tian Kai mentioned that China remains ready to hold trade talks with U.S. China is ready to address trade imbalance with U.S., buy more U.S. products and services. So looking to talk that up a little bit. As far as the U.S. session, we had a couple of squawks. We had squawk out of the China Foreign Minister Wang Yi, mentioned that U.S. putting pressure on Huawei is pure economic bullying. We also had a couple of Fed speakers this morning. Most notably, we had Fed's Bullard, who is a Dove and a voter, mentioned that we would not rule out rate cut later this year while speaking in Hong Kong on the U.S. economic outlook. We also had Fed's Williams, who is a moderate voter, mentioned that the U.S. economy is still in a very good place. Some risks to global growth have receded, reiterates no argument to move rates at this point. And that kind of leads us to our key event for this afternoon is the FOMC meeting minutes coming out at 2 p.m. Something traders will keep an eye on with regards to if the Fed has any change of stance from that keyword patience. So they've been mentioning patience quite often in the last couple of months, and we'll see if this report, or rather if this statement, has any changes to their stance. And that is what traders will be looking out for around 2 p.m. So that's something to keep an eye out. Wouldn't want to have any positions open leading into it. However, after the event, we could look for the impulse move. We have a news trading strategy here with Trade Pro Academy. Look for the impulse move, wait for that pullback, and then get in on that consolidation for the continuation move. And so that's something that's quite repeatable. We do that with crude oil almost every week on Wednesday, and today just happens to be one of those days. So we'll go through that on our oil charts. And really, that's as much as we have for equities. So just keep an eye out for those FOMC meeting minutes. Also, anything with regards to the U.S.-China trade wars, any squawks with regards to updates on that front will also have a key impact here in those markets. Outside of economic releases here from the States, we did have that major crude oil report, the EIA report that comes in every Wednesday. I had that released today at 10:30, and in today's session, we had a pretty massive build, which is seen as bearish for crude. See the numbers I have here from yesterday's API report. Came in at a build of 2.4 million barrels versus 8.6 million expected. And the number that came in today was a build of 4.7 million versus minus 1.5 million expected. So big build on the crude oil report. As a result of that, crude oil is a supply and demand market. And when you see a big build like that, that means there's more supply in the market. What happens when there is more supply? Typically, prices tend to decrease down into demand where buyers are willing to pay less for that because there's so much supply. Simple Econ 101, supply and demand. That's what we have on crude. Gasoline as well came in at a pretty nice build, plus 3.7 million versus minus 1 million expected. Distillates also came in at a bit of a build at plus 0.8 million versus minus 0.5 million expected. So a bit of a build across the board. Generally, when you see that happening across crude, gasoline, and distillates, you get quite a nice move out of that, and that's what we've seen in the crude oil markets today. So with that being said, that's what we've got as far as news for today's session. So we covered the EIA reports. We've had a couple of Fed speakers speaking today, and we've got FOMC statement at 2 p.m. So that's going to be a major driver for the remainder of today's session. SPUs themselves are a little bit choppy on the session so far today. We are down as per our quote board, which we'll explain in a second. However, it's been pretty choppy. We have caught a nice little bid off of the open, but we kind of come back to that open, retested it, and not really pressing any higher or pressing any lower. So it looks like the market is waiting for that release at 2 p.m. That's coming in about 2 hours. So we'll see what happens there. We'll give you some key levels to watch out for on either side. So if we get a bullish break, you guys will know what levels to target. If we get a bearish break, you guys will know what levels to target as well. So now that we've covered that, let us switch over to our charts here. Get on the screen share. Let me peek over at my actual, it's not here. Let me peek over at the actual report. See if there's anybody commenting. William, afternoon. Sir, hopefully it's nice out in Cancun. Manpreet Randawa, hello, hello. All right. Said hello to the team here. Thank you guys for watching, signing in here and following along. Really appreciate you guys coming out, taking the time. Hopefully we're providing you guys good value, and that's why you are showing up. So let's get started on the quote board. ES futures up top, volume 833,000 contracts on the session so far, and daily change percentage down 0.24%. This is down from the previous day close here at the 2864 hat. So looking pretty good on that front. We are down from the previous day close, but we are above the current U.S. session open here. So a little bit mixed on that front, as I was mentioning. I'll give you some of those key levels. As far as volume is concerned, a little bit on the lighter side, considering the past 2 weeks, we've seen around 1 to 1.5 million contracts traded by this time. So a little bit on the lighter end. And again, this is likely due to the fact that we've got FOMC out at 2 p.m. and most traders, just based on the price action here, it looks like most traders are waiting for that report to come in and take some trades there. Sean C, 84, oil bounce back. I will cover that in a second. Don't necessarily think it's going to bounce back. However, we are looking pretty oversold at this point, so I'll cover that in just a moment. Crude oil here, let's take a look at the volume. Again, just about on average, 450 to 500 has been on average. So you can even go ahead and say this is just a little slightly above average at 560. Good volatility, however, in this market today, down 2.87%. Our previous day close came in at 62.93, and the last traded price is at 61.30. So oil is obviously a lot better of a market to trade today, a lot more direction on that front, and the room was trading that a little bit more actively today on the back of some quiet SPUs. So with that being said, let's switch off to our pivot charts here. Left-hand side, you've got crude oil. Right-hand side, you've got the S&P 500. This is the 1 hour bar charts, and 522, this is your current session. This was the Globex open. So if I minimize this just a touch, there we go. So if I minimize this just a touch, you'll see that basically spilled throughout the Globex open, right? Stayed below that pivot. As we came into, London open was more so around this 3 a.m. mark, stayed below that S1. You can see we just held that S1 as resistance leading up to the pit open, right around 9 a.m. So that'll be split right between these two suckers. We came into that S2 around 9 a.m. We caught a bit of a bid back up to that S1, and that was resistance once, resistance twice, resistance 3 times. We saw the buyers press this thing up into that S1 around those 62, 65s, and that was kind of on the back of the crude oil report. Little press higher, and then we saw the ultimate move back down, broke below the S2s, back below S3, 61.65, and now we are in the neighborhood of S4 coming in at 61.09. So bearish on the session. If you guys have been following us and you know how we use the pivots, pivots are basically used kind of for sentiment and also support and resistance. So how we'll use this thing now is S3. Now that we've pressed below it, S3, any rotations up into it should be held as, or rather should be defended as resistance right around that 61.65. And really S3, we consider anything around the S3s and lower, or R3s and higher, to be oversold and overbought conditions. These are generally extremes. You don't often see markets hit S3 on a trading session or the R3 on a trading session. Generally, what tends to happen if those levels are traded is that the market will start to reverse. So don't really see too much further downside here on crude. I could see us pressing maybe down into that S4 around the 61, but I don't really expect too much for the remainder of today's session going into that pit view app. Like I said, S3 will be a resistance if we can get back up there, your 61.65s. So watch for that level if it can get back up there. If not, your 61s will likely be a level of support. So I do not recommend counter trend fading this, as you would have been getting annihilated trying to pick up the lows here, as this thing is going lower. However, if we do come back down, retest that 61 as a double bottom, then we could potentially see a counter trend rotation back up to press that S3. So I think we'll be stuck between that S4 and S3 range for the remainder of the session. Don't really see us pressing below 61. Can it happen? Sure it can, but as considering we're oversold and we're almost 3% down from the previous day close, wouldn't be surprised to see us, catch a bit of a rally, catch a bit of a bounce into that pit close, so that we close the daily bar, off of the lows. So if you imagine a daily candlestick, right? Imagine this is a bearish candlestick. This is all red, right? Imagine that we are here at the moment. These are your lows. So your lows will be around, let's say, the 61s. And on the daily candle, if you get a bid off of the lows, that is what this wick looks like here. So I think we've got, the body of the daily candle set more or less today. Now we'll likely just pull off of those lows and create that, a little bit of a rotation off of those lows. So we'll see where that takes us. Like I said, S3 and S4 is your range for this part of the session. So we'll take a quick peek at the crude oil charts in a moment, but as far as the pivots are concerned, still bearish, but at this point, it's looking oversold. So you could be looking to pick up a counter trend fade if the setup comes about. As either a pro trader or elite trader, to get access to that room, it is a Zoom webinar. So how we run it is basically from 9 a.m. till 9:15. We run that room. We open up the room where we do the live morning update on YouTube. Then we switch back to our screens from 9:15 till around 11:30ish. We do the day trading room, and then we sign off from there and switch into our elite trading room, which is open to only elite traders, and that goes on usually from around 11:15, 11:30 till around 12:30 when I start this update. So that's what that room looks like. We also do have extended hours during London. So we have our trader David out of Hawaii running the room from 3 a.m. Eastern time till 5 a.m. Eastern time on most sessions. So you get cash open to European cash close coverage of the equity and crude oil markets, and then you get London hours coverage of those aforementioned markets as well. So overall, if you're on the West Coast or if you're over in Europe, Asia, anywhere around there where US hours don't really work out, we've got you covered with David here trading those 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. times. Sean C84, what chart time are you using in top left? None of these charts are time. Let me rephrase that. Only the pivot charts down here, these guys are time-based. These are 1 hour pivot charts, 1 hour bar charts. The top charts here on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, these are range bar charts. So they do not take time into account. They are strictly focused on price and traded, or just price really. So if you want to know a little bit more about these charts, I'd recommend checking out our YouTube video on range bar charts. I'm not too sure when I released that. I made that video probably within the last 2 months. So I'd recommend checking that out to get a better idea of what range bar charts are. We do not use time-based charts especially in our day trading. We do not use time-based charts. We use these range bar charts simply because they show price action a lot cleaner. You're better able to see market structure, and it's a lot easier to qualify good structure and trending markets based on the way that these range bars form. So again, if you want a little bit more on that, check out that range bar video. Type in the search bar, TRADEPRO Academy range bar, and that video should show up for you. I can navigate to that at the end. If that's something you're interested in, let me know. Just throw in a Y in the chat. So where was I? We talked about crude. Let's look at the pivots now for S&P 500. What you're seeing here on the S&P 500 is a bit of chop. So yesterday's session, we were mentioning that, SPOs were starting to form some bearish market structure. We had the high, the low, the lower high, the lower low, and that this 2870 level was a key line in the sand here for the bears to defend. And I was mentioning during yesterday's update, if we get a rotation back up into those 2870s and that fails, that we could see a bit of a spill back into those overnight lows, which were down here at the time. And so that's kind of what we got into Globex. We saw that failure to get back above 2870s, and we had to get rid of some of these sell stops of the late buyers that bought up here. And that's what we saw coming into the open today. So what we're seeing on today's session as far as the pivots are concerned is pretty neutral, right? We've traded above the pivot, kind of held that level, bounced off, broke it to the downside, retested it again, and we saw retest that got sold off almost back to your S1 around the 2850s. And now we're back at that pivot again, right around your 2860s. So super choppy on this session, to be quite honest. We did catch a couple of trades in the room on the SPOs. However, it's been crude has really been the market to take advantage of today. So as we stand, pivot is your resistance. We broke it once. Now we've retested it. Now we're coming back up for a second retest. So first time around, we saw this thing hold as resistance. Granted, it did poke its head above it by quite a few ticks. We are back down below it now. So as it stands, 1219. So this current hourly bar right here is just 20 minutes into formation. So we'll see what happens here. But ultimately, if we do get a close below the pivot here on this 1 hour time frame, I could see us pressing back down towards those S1s. If we get back up above it and close above that pivot, I could see us trying to press those 2870s again for an ultimate move back up around those 2890s. And I think the FOMC, on the back of the FOMC, we could see some nice movement, just for the sole reason that it's been kind of choppy today, and what generally precedes big breakouts is consolidation. And the longer the consolidation, the bigger the breakout tends to be. So that is something that we'll be watching for. And based on the pivot chart right now, I would say we're pretty neutral. Really, the pivot is kind of your line in the sand. It's the middle of the range, and we're sat right there at the moment. So neutral to bearish at the moment, and I'll give you some key levels to watch out for here on the S&P 500 once I get to that chart up top. So as far as crude is concerned, bearish as long as we stay below that S3. As long for SPOs, as long as we maintain above, or rather as long as we hold that pivot as resistance, we're looking to press back down into those S1s. If we get back up above it, I can see us pressing those 2870s again and trying to get a punch back up into those previous highs here around those 2890s. So we'll see if the market can push up there. FOMC might just give us the fuel we need to get up there. So that's all for the pivot charts. Let's take a peek at oil now. And what you are seeing is a lovely trend here on crude oil. Crude is one of those markets that when it trends, it is it's almost textbook. A lot of people that have studied technical analysis, at least the technical analysis that's been taught in those books, I'd say pre-algos, pre-2008, have, you know, support, rotates, comes back down, retraces back up to previous low, sells off. And I mean, that still works. That's one of the key concepts we use for price action is the flip zone, you know, support, flips under, breaks it, rotates back into it as resistance, presses lower. And crude is one of those kinds of markets that tends to do that quite nicely. What you're seeing here is an open at the 62.20s. So that is where the pit opened just above that overnight low at the 62.05. And right off the open, we saw a bid coming back into that previous day low. Can't really see it here, but this is this green little line PDL here around the 62.78. Didn't quite get up to that level before the sellers stepped on this thing, pressed it back down below the VWAP. 10:30 right around here is the time that you're, I mean, this isn't the straightest line, but this is the time that the oil report came out. So you saw the initial impulse move lower, and this is what I was mentioning. You get the impulse move lower, you get the consolidation, and then you get the continuation. And this happens on most news days. This is how we trade NFP. This is how we trade crude oil inventory reports. This is how we trade around FOMC statements, Fed funds rates, etc. You get the initial move, consolidation, and then you look to jump on the impulse continuation. So what you're seeing now is came down, held that open, broke back below it, back below that overnight low at the 62.05s, came into our support zone here around the 61.70s, found some support here. We had some buyers stepping in, as you can see. Volume was kind of picking up in this level. But what you would notice is that the buyers weren't able to force this thing any higher. Each of these rotations back up to the top of that range was getting absorbed by selling. And we ultimately broke that low, rotated back up into the middle of the structure, and then continued lower. And so now we have pressed off of these lows around the 61.11s, came back up into those 61.40s, nice level of resistance. That level is holding. What you are seeing here as the market's starting to rotate lower is volumes picking up. So 61.10 to 61 is your next target here. This is really a line in the sand for the bulls. I mean, I don't really recommend buying anything here, but what you can look to try to do is, because we are coming into that S4 and the market is considered oversold, if we see some sort of formation like this, where you have the initial move, you've got that low printed, that rotation up. If it comes back down in here, breaks this low by 1 or 2 ticks, and then rotates back up nice and quick, at that point you can look to potentially qualify qualify a fade back up to these 61.50s, maybe back up to these 61.80s. Ultimately, if this thing really wants to pick itself up, it'll come back up to that VWAP, but I don't think that's in store for this session. Downside is the right side. So as it stands, you don't want to be shorting right into previous lows. You kind of missed the opportunity up here. So now you have to wait for one of 2 things to happen. You got to wait for a break of these lows, little rotation up into it, hold that support for a press lower, or you're going to see a double bottom kind of failure here, and then this thing's going to press up. If it comes up into this level here around the 61.40s and breaks that, that will be a short-term sign of strength coming in and rotations on that. If we see that hold here around those 61.45s, 50s, you could look to press this up for a pit fade going into the pit close around 230. Alternatively, if this thing just flushes right through that on big volume, if this volume starts picking up on a breakdown of that level, then you can look to short this thing on rotations back higher. So that's kind of how we'll be trading it. You see, we've traded into that level, little 10 tick. Is this a 10 tick? Yeah, this is a 10 tick. Traded into that level, little wick here. We'll see if this thing starts pulling up here. That'll give you a sign that you can start gearing up for longs for counter trend fade. Still super risky down here. Up above it, like I said, above the 41 45s, you could start looking to qualify something now that you've got a break of previous market structure for a press higher. As long as it remains within this range, you're not going to be doing anything to the short side, right? Unless it comes back into here, you might have one more chance to sell it for another press lower. After 2 rotations like that, it becomes a little bit more dangerous. Retail bus becomes full with sellers, and that's when you get your buy stop release above that level. So that's something else to look out for. You know, if we start to rotate within this zone, and you know, if after each of these rotations the dips become lower or they start making higher lows, kind of like this, that will give you a sign, you know, retail bus is getting full of shorts. So shorts coming in, shorts coming in, shorts coming in, and their stops are just sitting above. And if that happens, that's when you get your buy stop release above that. You can look to play a rotation a little bit higher. All right, so that's what we'll be watching for on crude. You don't want to set a limit blind because you will get absolutely annihilated. And, you know, you don't want to learn that way. That's not the best way to learn, is by getting annihilated that way. I'm brand new to trading. Where do you suggest I begin? Michael Smith, I suggest you start with our foundations course. The foundations course was designed with the beginner in mind. And what it will do is essentially get you from beginner and get you starting on technical analysis. You'll essentially learn how to analyze a price chart, whether it's, you know, stocks, Forex, currency. I mean, Forex and currencies are the same thing. Stocks, currencies, great place to start. And then from the foundations course, that gives you we call it the foundations course because it gives you the foundation to expand into the other niches. So, you know, if you do the foundations course and then you want to start to do day trading, then you can go from the foundations course into the futures day trading course and take that route. Or if you want to do it a little bit more passively, you know, you can go from the foundations course and then jump into the options course if that's one of the options you want to do, or jump into the Forex course as well. So foundations course is the foundation of everything that we teach. And then from there, we expand and get into a little bit more advanced topics as they relate to the niche. So if you're looking to do day trading, you'll have some of the concepts from the foundations course, but they're going to be a little bit more advanced than what you learn in there. All right, so that's what that looks like. On oil, let me navigate over to the S&P 500, and you guys will have a little bit better of an idea as to what I was mentioning here when I said that it's been quite choppy. So let me just drop this down a little bit there just to capture. There we go. All right, so this is what our levels look like here for the moment. SPOOs opened up around 28.56. I mean, I had 2 different readings on this, but I'll just use this one. Opened up around here, a little bit of a bid off of the open. Room was trying to capture that. Was that it? Yeah, that was it. So we came off of the overnight low around the 48 quarters, and off of the open, you know, we kind of sold off into this 28.54s. There's 1 rotation, 2 rotation. We're unable to get any lower, and so the buyers really stepped on in here, right into the volume profile point of control here. This is the 5-day volume profile point of control. See this big little stack of volume. This is why that is the point of control. That's where the most activity has happened over the last 5 days, and you can see it's no surprise that we are consolidating that level at the moment. And that's kind of where we've been through today's session. You know, we're still above the open. We've tested it, came here once off this bid, back up into that previous day close, poked our head above it, and then we rotated lower, made another bottom here, again at those 54s. I think I actually caught a trade here up into this VWAP. Sold it a bit early, could have rode it out to the top here, but that's okay. Came back up into these 62s, held that as resistance. Seller stepped on in, pressed this thing back down here. So as it stands, really, we had I'm seeing this kind of as a deviation outside of this zone here, right? Deviation, came back in that level, rotated back up, seller stepped on this thing, and now we're kind of hanging out within this range. So your range at the moment, as it stands into FOMC, you've got your 62 here as resistance. You've got your 54 here as support. If we can get back up above that 62, you've got your overnight highs and your previous day highs in store. This will have some sell stop or buy stop sitting right above it if we can get back up there. And to your downside, really, that 54 is your first level of support. If we can press back below this thing, a nice close below it. You see, we never got a close below it. Each time it dipped into it, we had a wick, which shows us that buyers were absorbing that. We want to see a nice black candle as such, break below that here, and then hold for 1 or 2 rotations on the 5-tick chart in order to look to press this thing back, back down to the overnight low. And this little blue line here is our value area low for the past 5 days. So this level between the value area high and the value area low captures around 70% of the price action of the range in the last 5 days. So if we see a press down into the overnight low, generally what tends to happen is if it comes down into the value area low and kind of hangs around that level and it's built, that means that, sellers are accepting lower prices and buyers are they're building out value here. If we see that, we can expect a continuation lower. If it comes in here and kind of just rejects right away, you might see a rotation back up into those 54s, at which point, support break of it should become resistance, and you can look to sell this thing back down to the overnight low and potentially down into those 38s. So that is what we have on both of these markets, crude oil and S&P 500. Gave you guys those key levels as we approach that FOMC announcement. And to close out the update here, I will show you guys our TRADEPRO Performance Index right in there. And what this shows you guys is how our community is doing on a daily basis. We've been doing quite well in May, another stellar day here for our team. 68.89% of the room finished green today. Just under 60% were up. Just over 11% were flat, and just over 30% were down on the session. So strength continues here in the TRADEPRO Performance Index. Our team is doing extremely well here. Average for the month so far is 66%, and we've got just about a week or so of May left. So looking to close the month out strong. We're doing a really great job here, especially when it gets nice and volatile. Those are really the days that the team capitalizes on the markets, especially when crude is trending as it is today. That's one of the important things of day trading, watching multiple assets and being comfortable trading multiple assets, so that if one of them is chopping around like S&P 500 is, you have another market where you have opportunities, and opportunities come in the form of volatility, and that's what you're seeing on crude oil today. So very great day for our room here. Very proud of you guys. If there's any of you watching here, and we're going to be closing this out now. Let me just flip the camera back off, and we will sign out here. So if you will be trading into that latter end of the session, remember the 3 rules: patience, diligence, and discipline. I'm expecting at least the S&P 500 to be a little bit quiet, a little bit choppy leading up into that 2 p.m. And then after the 2 p.m., we'll watch for the reaction from the market and see if we can play any of the play the correction and look to get in on a pullback for the impulse move, whether it's up or down. So that's going to be a sign off on today's session, and we will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you guys for popping in, throwing in, participating in the chat. That's great to see. If you guys are enjoying these updates, make sure to let us know. A couple ways you can do that, submitting comments in the chat as we go through. I'm really enjoying the interaction here. I just found out how to do that. So interaction is great. I'd like you guys to continue doing that if you may. You can also like this video, like this recording, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and click that little notification bell so that you are notified when we go live, whether it's for a morning update at 9 a.m. Eastern time or whether it's our midday update here that starts at 12 p.m. You guys should be subscribed. You guys will get notified anytime we go live, and try to provide you guys great value, keep you on the right side of these markets. And if you've been reviewing some of the recorded sessions here, you'll see that we do a pretty good job keeping you guys on top of good levels and keeping you guys in line with, you know, overnight drivers, market sentiment, etc. So we'll continue to do these as long as you guys continue to come in, participate, and show us love. That's really going to be everything that we've got until tomorrow. Take care, guys. Good luck and good trading. This is Mark from TRADEPRO Academy signing off. Take care, guys.